So the order matters for variables and constants. It does not for functions. There's one more interesting thing in our code here, and that's that we have a constant here in the function, and we have a variable and a constant outside of the function. Now, when should you use what, and what's the difference? Is there a difference? Well, there is a difference, and generally, if you use some data only in the function, like this result, which I use in the function, I return it here, then you wanna define it in the function. I could have said, let result here, and then just assign a new value here, and then we could even do something strange. We could say, add like this, and set current result equal to result. This code would technically work because what I'm doing here is I'm defining this result variable globally, so in my script. Then I assign a new value to it in a function, because in your functions, and that's one important thing to keep in mind, you can access any variable or constant defined outside of the function. So you can read variables or constants defined globally. So we can interact with this result variable, and I'm assigning a new value to it. And therefore, when I thereafter call the function, I actually don't care about the return value. I let that go into the void. But since inside of the function, I assigned a new value to result, I can use that global variable and store it in another global variable or use it anywhere else, whatever you want to do. This, however, would not be very good code because we have a function that manipulates a global variable. That's sometimes something you want to do, but often that makes your functions harder to understand and harder to predict what they're going to do. And in addition, that we return this value here is totally redundant, so not the best code we could write. Instead, it's way better if we go with the setup we had before, where we have our contained constant here, we return this, and the function therefore works standalone. It doesn't magically change our global variables. Instead, we know when we call the function, this function will not alter anything, not anything global. Instead, it will only work with its internal data and then return us. This is called a pure function. It gets some input, returns output. For the same input, it always returns the same output, and it doesn't manipulate anything global. But it is worth noting that functions can access global variables. They can also access other functions you might have defined. So you can call a function from inside a function. And that is built into JavaScript, and it's a good thing, which we'll also use from time to time. Now, the other way around won't work though. If you define a constant or a variable inside of a function, then this has a so-called local or block scope, which means it's available inside of this block. The block is surrounded or marked by these curly braces, and we can use it anywhere in this block, but we can't use it outside of there. So if I try to throw an alert where I want to output the value that's stored in result here after defining the function, you'll see that if I reload this, nothing happens. You see, we seem to have an error, and indeed, if I open my console in the developer tools again, I get a reference error that result is not defined. Because I'm trying to use a variable here in line 9, so in this line here, which wasn't defined. Because, as I just explained, you can use global variables and constants and functions inside of functions, but you can't use local variables or constants or functions, so variables or constants or functions defined inside of functions. And yes, you can define functions inside of functions, something I'll dive in later. You can't use those from outside of the function. So using result outside of the function won't work because this is a constant defined inside of the function. And it won't work no matter if we use it here or here after we called the function. Because you could think, well, we only called the function here, so thereafter result has to be defined and now it should be available. Well, actually, as it turns out, if you now reload, you still get the same error here. Now in line 11 instead of line 9 because I moved that code, but still result is not available outside of the function. And that's one important thing you need to understand with JavaScript. Functions have full access to their surrounding context, so to all the variables and so on that are defined above them or outside of them. But what you define inside of a function is only available in there. The only way of kind of getting it out is by returning it. Now, at this point, you might also wonder, what if a variable is defined globally and then we try to create it locally in a function as well? So we have it declared with let or const globally, and then we want to do the same with let or const in the function. So not overwrite the existing one, but create a new one. Is that possible? And the answer would be yes. This is a process called shadowing. And in the lecture after this one, I'll dive a bit deeper into this.